Welcome, everyone. We're so pleased that you could join us for our webinar today. Bennett and I are from Clarion AI Partners, and this webinar is sponsored by the Salt Lake Chamber of Commerce. My name is Jess Thurston. I'm Bennett's Chief of Staff, and I'm here to introduce him today. We're thrilled to have Bennett address us today about the different areas of AI in terms of legal area and using it in your business. I'm going to throw it over to Bennett now, and he can introduce himself and start on our webinar.
Thanks so much, Jess, and thanks for everyone for attending today. The world of AI is constantly changing, especially with all the regulatory developments that we have. And so today we're going to cover quite a lot. We have a Q&A open to allow you to put questions in, and we'll try to answer those throughout or at the end. Let me introduce myself. I am a lawyer and data scientist. I came to the law in kind of an odd way. I started in U.S. intelligence for about 8 years before going on and getting a law degree from Georgetown University and then a graduate degree from NYU. We formed Clarion AI Law quite recently. This is a odd little conglomeration of what we do. We are a law firm, so everybody at the firm who are lawyers are also data scientists. Which allows us to have a very deep understanding of where the technology is, but also where AI law is, where it's headed, and how do you leverage AI for your company in a safe, effective, and compliant way. We also have the AI Foundry. This is where our builders live. So we actually build AI-based solutions for clients. We will oversee those builds. We will come in and after they are built and independently test them, and provide a report under privilege. And then we have the Academy arm. And the Academy arm is something that we're most proud of because this is where we work with nonprofits and public policy makers, the bench and the bar, trying to increase access to justice and have an influence upon good public policy that is both fair to business and to the community. So today we're going to cover a lot. We have our regulatory update, both federal and state. Then we'll talk about some advancements in technology. And then we'll end with how do you actually start to think about bringing AI into your company and where are we seeing some of the most advanced uses to bring about this transformative power that AI brings. So let's start with the regulatory update. On the federal side, it's quite interesting. As you've seen the flurry of more than 100 executive orders come out of the White House, many of them to do with AI. But the one that is most pertinent to our discussion today is the revocation of the Biden administration's executive order on AI and the replacement of it with one with the Trump administration. So it's interesting because most of the work under the Biden executive order for AI had already been completed. It's basically instructed 25 or so federal entities to come up with guidance, look at their rules, look at their areas of jurisdiction, and come up with new guidance, proposed rules, take other actions about AI within their area of expertise. And so that all of that guidance and regulatory updates are still in place. It didn't actually remove any of that. But under the new Trump administration executive order, it's formed a commission where they have about 6 months to look at basically every action taken under the Biden executive order on AI and figure out whether any of it needs to be rescinded, revised, or such. We do have some idea of what's coming out of Washington. And all our conversations on the Hill and with entities interacting with the Hill in the DC Hill, not the Salt Lake Hill, what we're seeing is an overall decrease in regulation. So some of the most interesting insights have come out of Commissioner Ferguson of the Federal Trade Commission. He is now the new chairman of the Federal Trade Commission, which has been kind of the leading regulator on AI. Was a minority member of the commission for years, and has now taken on the chairmanship. But he has talked a great deal about what he believes AI regulation how it should proceed. And so an emphasis on deregulation. So let's not stifle innovation while trying to be safe, but also a focus on industry self-regulation. So, as you know, in many industries, groups of companies in those industries will get together and come up with frameworks or standards that they will abide by or that control their industry. This is what the emphasis under the new Trump administration is to let industry thrive, let us experiment with AI, and come up with good frameworks for the design, governance, implementation, and especially testing and monitoring of AI. So this new um, commission that's been formed under the Trump executive order, they're going to review all the actions taken by the Biden under the Biden executive order to kind of reassess. As you've seen, if you watched and looked at any of the executive orders, um, the Trump administration is very focused on the America's dominance in certain areas and innovation in AI in particular. And so decreasing the regulatory burden on companies and trying to free up resources for innovation. So this new committee will report out in July 22nd, 2025. And that's where we may see some significant changes. It's not, it doesn't prevent the administration from changing any of the guidance that has been issued thus far, but it's likely that most of the changes we're going to see are going to arrive this summer. On the federal level, we are going to see a lot of rollbacks and especially in this idea of disclosure auditing for the frontier models. So by frontier models, we need the big LLM. So OpenAI, Anthropic, Google, Amazon, and Apple's Llama, right? All these large frontier models. Under the Biden executive order, they had some pretty detailed reporting, auditing requirements about their models, and those have been rescinded. We're going to see a reduction in regulatory enforcement action and a little bit, which should free up more innovation. And a lot of companies, as we have worked with companies around the globe, they've kind of been waiting to see where the regulatory direction is going. Because if you invest a lot in AI and head in a particular direction, and then the regulatory environment changes, they're afraid that they've lost that investment or have to retool. We don't think that's actually true. That, as we'll talk about later in the webinar, you can build safely with AI today. But the nice thing is there's this perception that companies can move forward a little more with new guidance that will come out of the Trump administration. So let's switch to Utah. So Utah is tremendously progressive when it comes to AI regulation. And that is not a word we normally use in Utah, progressive when it comes to things. But it really is one of the states that has created the first state level regulator in the United States. And so last year, in the last 2024 legislative session, it created the Office of AI Policy in the Division of Commerce, under the Department of Commerce, the Division of Consumer Protection. This is the first of its kind in the state, in the United States. And it's been very interesting to watch what this office has done because its approach has been very different that we're seeing in some other states. The office has an obligation under the law to study different areas of law of society within the state to see where regulation needs to happen, where guidance needs to come forward. So every year they have a learning agenda that they put together where they interact with businesses and stakeholders, conduct a great deal of investigation to come up with proposed new regulatory guidance or laws to the legislature. It is one of the states that has passed some of the most progressive or stringent protection of children. So the social media law that passed last year has much higher requirements for social media companies for minors, and especially 16 and under and 13 and under. We've seen the rollout of educational AI-based systems across the state. Commissioner Superintendent Cindy Dixon of the State Board of Education and Matt Winters, who is the AI specialist for the board, has been very forward thinking and rolling out these AI-based educational tools. And what's interesting about that is these are made available across the state to different school districts. And it's the largest rollout of educational AI in the United States. And so the Office of AI Policy, along with the academic institutions in the state, recognized that this was a really significant event. Having a rollout of this size is just very unusual. And so formed a consortium of 13 different universities, both inside Utah and Stanford University, Arizona State University, to study the effects of these AI educational tools on students, teachers. How does it change how we teach? What does it affect on student outcomes? How are teachers using it? Who is and who isn't, and why? And so this should really further our understanding of how AI can really be a force multiplier for teachers in schools and what the effect that it has on our both children and teachers. And also, one of the things that we're very proud of at the Chamber is the formation of a new AI committee, with this webinar is hosted under, but to bring the business community together to understand the issues that presents, but also being able to interact with other key stakeholders at the Office of AI Policy and elsewhere in government, with the Academy, the bench, the bar, and human rights and civil rights groups. It is one of the most coordinated efforts that I've seen anywhere in the United States to try to bring the innovation of AI into Utah at all levels, the government and businesses, and to try to coordinate that perspective and share views on where to move forward. The 2025 session is a lively one for AI. Now, all of these bills that I'm going to talk about are just bills at this point. Most of them are likely to pass, but we wanted to give you a little bit of a highlight of what's going on the legislative session that's going on right now. So SB 226, which would become effective this May, takes one step further. So this was the same law that established the Office of AI Policy and a lot of the AI policy for the state. What this does is takes this one step further and defines requirements for what the legislature considers to be high-risk systems. So these are AI systems that are used in the provision of medical, legal, financial, or mental health services. And if there's the use of an AI system in one of these areas, there are reporting requirements, and this is really disclosure requirements. So think, do you have a chatbot from a local healthcare system that you can interact with and ask questions to? If it's an AI that you're interacting with and not a human being, then it has to disclose that. Simply say that you are interacting with a AI system, whether asked or not, right? So it has to disclose this kind of at the beginning and throughout. For other AI-based systems, if they have to disclose that they are interacting with a consumer, that the consumer is interacting with an AI bot or some other AI system, if asked or prompted. So if the person says, "Hey, are you a real human?" It has to say, "I'm not a real human," or vice versa. But the cool thing about what the state of Utah is doing, which is very unique, is in each of these laws, you'll notice that there's a safe harbor provision. And so Zach Boyd, the director of the Office of AI Policy, very smart in doing this, where you've got, here's your rules, but if you follow these rules, you get a rebuttable presumption of reasonableness, meaning that you get kind of a get out of jail free card if you can continue to prove that what you did was in fact reasonable. So for this law, this is one of those that has a safe harbor. It spells out the disclosure requirements, but if you follow them and can prove you did, then you get this rebuttable presumption. And also, the only enforcement can come from the Division of Consumer Protection. There's not a private right of action, meaning that just citizens can't come and bring cases against chatbot makers, but only the division can. The other, this one's a really interesting law, and I've not seen one like it in the United States yet. Now, this is called the App Store Accountability Act. It's SB 142. Notice it doesn't go into effect for an extra year. So this would go into effect in May 2026. But what's happening is that it's holding the providers of the app stores responsible for age gating, especially. So think the Apple App Store, the Google App Store, instead of making the app developers, they've got some requirements too, but it's the App Store provider that has to have more stringent age gating. So are you 13? Are you between 13 and 16? Are you above 16? Are you above 18? It also requires that any app that a child downloads has to be linked to a parental account, and that the parental account has to give consent for every download, every in-app purchase, every significant change. And so it really gives parents much more control over what children can download and use on there as far as apps go. For the app developer, they have to get this kind of age information from the App Store provider, and it has some disclosure requirements and things. Notice again, there's a safe harbor built into this. So if the App Store provider or the app developer follows the rules of this proposed bill, then it's presumed that they are acting reasonably and are not subject to an enforcement action. Notice, though, that this does have a private right of action, and it's the only one that does. So this is where a parent or child who is harmed by a violation of this act can bring a civil action in court against the app developer or the app store maker. That's quite interesting. I think we'll see more states starting to develop that as an additional enforcement mechanism. The SB 271 is about kind of the unauthorized AI use. So this is basically a deepfake law. There's already a deepfake law in effect in Utah that says you can't impersonate politicians or anybody else within 90 days of an election, right? Like it's basically about deepfake and in election cycles and things. This broadens that. So this says you can't make an AI deep fake of someone, like a celebrity or anybody else, and use it to make it appear that that person endorses a particular product. So this is a deep fake regulation that's coming into effect. It does have a private right of action for the individual. Like if you decided to make an avatar of William Shatner and have him selling, cookies, then William Shatner could come and bring a private right of action to prevent that. The other interesting ones that we're kind of grouped together here, all of these except for one come into effect in 25. So HB 13, it extends the definition of what sexual extortion is or sextortion is to include an AI generated image of a person. So not just typical sextortion, usually a minor gets conned into thinking they're speaking with someone of their age. They send an intimate picture, and then it's revealed that they're really being sextorted and that they're going to release the video for money, right? This broadened the definition so that even if it's an AI generated fake image of a person and used in sexual extortion, it is also a crime. HB 168 forms an AI in education task force. This is really to study and along with the consortia, the effect of AI in education. How do we bring it into the curriculum? How does it change pedagogically how we teach our kids? What effect does it have on children? HB 452 establishes, this was the first kind of major effort coming out of the Office of AI Policy, where last year they decided to look at mental health chatbots. So there are basically therapists in a box bots, right, that you can talk to, but you can imagine all the benefits, but also potential harms that come from that. So this is a pretty detailed law about the requirements that the makers, both the developers and the deployers of these mental health chatbots, they have to do certain things, certain disclosures, certain safety mechanisms. But again, if they do that, then they get a safe harbor. So there's a presumption that they've acted reasonably in any enforcement action against them. And finally, HB 418, and this one doesn't come into effect for an additional year, so July 2026. But what it requires is that social media companies have to establish a mechanism that a user can transfer all of their data from one to the other. So it's a data portability act. But so if I'm on Facebook and I decide I want to go to X, there has to be some mechanism that all the data they have about me can be transferred to the new platform. Interesting benefits about that, right? Like basically it pre-trains the algorithm all about you. But we are seeing this interesting uh, focus on social media protection for children. These high-risk areas like medical, legal, mental health advice is what we're seeing out of this legislative session, and very likely going to pass. Utah is not the only state who is working on this. Because we are going to see less federal action for a while, we're seeing states like Utah step into the gap. For instance, Colorado has a law on the books that goes into effect in February 2026. And it's very similar to the Utah law in that if AI is used in one of these 8, what they call high risk areas, then it requires particular governance to be in place. So, like a process for identifying risks and reasonably mitigating those risks. So, there's a governance requirement, there's a reporting requirement that says, hey, we're doing all the things you told us to do in our governance program. And then there's an ongoing testing and monitoring requirement. What's interesting about the law, too, is that it requires companies to keep 3 years of rolling records, 3 years records on a rolling basis of all their design testing, how they've complied, right? And what that does is create a discoverable record, right? And so if a company using AI in a high risk area gets into trouble somewhere, there's the discoverable evidence about how they designed and what they did or didn't do. The EU AI Act, I wouldn't worry about quite yet, right? Really, the provisions that go into effect immediately or like February are the ones that prohibit certain uses. In August of 25, it really are provisions relating to the frontier model creators, the LLM creators. August of 26 is when high risk systems, again, you're seeing this pattern where regulators are identifying high risk areas, and if you use AI in that area, you have heightened requirements. In the EU, these are defined pretty narrowly comparatively: critical infrastructure, education, employment, law enforcement. It's not going to affect US companies who are deploying AI systems, but it's something to keep on the back of your mind, especially if you work with have AI systems that are deployed in Europe, have European citizens, then and more you work in one of these areas, it's important to start to keep those in mind.
We
Before
do
we run
have,
into, yeah,
sorry, we do have a few questions that have come up about all of this. We'll let Bennett take a quick drink and and rest for just a moment. So we have 3 questions right now in the chat. You're welcome to add a few more questions as we go through these if you have questions about the legal landscape right now. So Tara asks about the AI amendments SB 226. She asked if it would be enforceable for all digital platforms that interact with Utah citizens, or is this just for Utah businesses that are using AI?
So it would apply to anyone who is providing services to a citizen of Utah, is the way that it works. So it's jurisdiction, like most of them, it protects the citizens of Utah. So it could be a company outside of Utah that is providing services into Utah, where any Utah citizens it would apply to them.
Interesting. Great. Thank you. Tara, let us know if that, great. Looks like that answered her question. Gabrielle asked if we're going to address the heightened privacy concerns with the move to deregulate and the removal of disclosure requirements on the federal level.
Yeah, sure. Right. Like, so we're there, the Trump administration sees a trade-off between regulation and innovation. And that's not necessarily true. It's not like when you give up innovation every time you have a regulation involved, right? So it's not a zero-sum game. There are increased privacy concerns. There are concerns about what our company is going to do now that they feel like they got more free reign. And so what that means, though, is that the companies, as we'll talk about, the companies that deploy these systems or use AI, build AI agents, it's going to fall on your shoulders. So you've got to be the one to make sure that you've got the controls in place that fit your company's policies, local rules, especially state rules, federal. So as we'll talk about a little later, you can do this safely, even in a very fluid regulatory environment.
Excellent. Thanks, Bennett. Last question from Tom. He says, accountability wise, if one is using a voiced AI bot to make cold phone calls, let's assume they are in a high risk, like a financial industry, must they disclose even if they're unasked?
Yes. So if you're interacting with an AI-based system, so a citizen of Utah interacting with any AI-based system, and an AI voice, like an AI created voice, I think would be considered under this law to be an AI-based system, then it would have to be disclosed in a high risk area if it's an AI based system. So I think the answer to that is yes. But realize too, all these laws are still in committees and we might get little changes here and there, but that is where the world stands today.
Excellent.
So
Those are all our questions for now. Thanks, Bennett.
thanks, Jess. So what I want to focus on now, though, is look, the regulatory situation is fluid. It has been for the last, 2 years, 2.5 years since Gen AI really hit the mainstream. It's going to remain fluid for a while. We are going to see action in child safety, deep fakes, watermarking, like deep fakes proving that it's an AI-based image versus a human-created image, things like that. Those we're likely to see some federal movement on. Elsewise, it's the states and a company's own ethics, risk appetite, etc. Right? Because just because there's not an AI law doesn't mean you can't do harm with AI, right? And so that means that you still have to think about how does my company's introduction of AI into this particular workflow change my risk profile, which we'll talk about a little bit. So we advise some of the world's largest companies on, including all the way down to some little companies. The whole point of Clarion is AI for everybody, right? Um, they don't know how to decide whether to use AI, right? They're like, man, we feel such pressure to innovate, but we don't know how to do this safely. So part of this is having an AI strategic program or governance program, right? So this is usually has these pieces you see here. There's some kind of committee that is in charge of AI strategy for the company once you get it to be a certain size. It's important. So if you look at the NIST AI risk management framework, this is the most popular. It came out of the National Institutes for Standard and Technology. It's been written into several laws that if you're compliant with the NIST risk management framework, then you get a rebuttal presumption that you acted reasonably. But you want this committee to have different lines of sight, different experiences around the company. So you want business people, compliance people, security, HR, IT, and it's going to vary depending on your company, but you want the right people at the table to consider the different aspects and pros and cons of AI. That committee typically has a charter that defines what it does and how it does what business comes before it, how it considers things. Then that committee typically drafts an AI policy. And this is kind of a company-wide policy that says what the company's kind of take on AI is. So we will act responsibly with your data, and 2 or 3 bullet points that describe what that is. We will be transparent in our use of AI. And so this is, it's not necessarily an extensive document. It's kind of like a constitution of how the company, some of them are external facing, right, to inform consumers about how the company will act. And then there's typically a more detailed one about how internal the use of AI. Um, then the real power of an AI strategic program is when you can figure out how to evaluate a proposed AI use case. So somebody comes to somebody in the company goes, man, I've got this great idea for using AI to do this. Well, how does a company think about that? Like, how do they evaluate that? Is it a good idea? What are the pros? What are the cons? What does it open us up to legal liability? Right. And that can all be done through this use case approval process. Typically, companies will think in advance kind of what AI risks informed by their AI policy and their regulatory rubric in which they operate, what risks are higher than others, right? And you can think about these in advance and come up with what we call a use case risk matrix. The closer your AI system comes to touching the world, like making a decision or making an effect on the world, the higher the risk it is. So if you're interacting with the public or an employee, a patient, right? Those, and if you're acting within your regulated area, insurance, financial services, healthcare, the closer you are to regulatory behavior and the closer you are to touching, making a decision that affects a consumer or an employee, the higher risk you're going to have. But if the companies, and we help companies do this all the time, and this is the most important thing that you can get help with, is figuring out what your risk appetite is, what your AI strategy is in your policy, and how to approve proposed use cases. That is what is going to make the ability to act more agilely and quickly and consistently and use AI across your company to really take advantage of these truly transformative effects. Because you really can create your AI program and build AI systems or evaluate third-party systems, even in a fluid regulatory environment. A lot of companies, when we start talking to them, they're like, I don't know how to think about like the risks of AI. And we're like, yeah, actually you do. Every company works within its regulatory context, right? Whatever that is. And they already have controls in place to stay compliant in that in regulatory rubric. So you're not starting over from scratch. What you're asking yourself is, if I introduce AI into this particular workflow, how does my risk profile change? What risks am I introducing by introducing AI? And then how can I reasonably mitigate those risks? The nice thing is that AI is a technology, and so it can be technologically controlled. So what our Foundry Shop does and what we teach our clients to do is when you're building an AI-based solution, go through this process, understand what risks you may be facing, and then put in the technical controls into the model or agent that spit out metrics that prove moment by moment that the AI system is staying within whatever parameters you're set up. And those parameters can be legal, right? Like we've got some legal requirements, regulatory requirements, and then um, ethical or company policy requirements. We do audits of AI systems, and I will tell you, it is if you have built-in metrics to show how the system is performing on an ongoing basis, it makes auditing those systems and proving that they're acting how they're acting so much easier. If we have to go back and look at 3 years of what an underwriting algorithm for insurance or credit cards has done over the last 3 to 5, that's crazy harder. So the key thing to remember here is that when you don't have clear regulatory guidance, which in some places we do, some places we don't, the world falls back on this idea of reasonableness. If you look at all the court cases, the social media, big class action in California, all the copyright cases where people are copyright owners are saying, "Hey, model builders, you took my book and you gobbled it up into your model, and now I think that violates my rights." We don't have clear law on those situations. And so if you look at what the judges do, they fall back on this idea of reasonableness. And what it says is, what would a company do to identify reasonably foreseeable risks and then put in mitigation controls to reasonably mitigate that risk? Reasonableness is basically means, do you have a good reason, right? Like, can you explain what you did? So by having an AI governance structure with a use case approval process that identifies the potential risks and then instructs the builder of the AI system, or if you're using a third party, what controls and metrics you have to have in place to make this thing run, then you're pretty golden. If you have to explain your behavior to a court, to a regulator, or the court of public opinion, which is sometimes the most difficult to face. So let's, in our last few minutes here, let's talk about, so how do you actually use this stuff, right? What are we seeing as the best use cases in AI? Here's the truth of it all, right? AI is the most transformative technology since electricity, more than the internet, more than the web, more than the printing press. And it is happening faster than any of those technologies have ever affected the world. And it is affecting the knowledge worker class, which is very different. Usually, look at the second industrial revolution. Most of the things that were created were help us make factories, that have machinery and things, right? So the physical laborers made them more efficient and building more capacity. This is one of the first technologies that's really directly hitting the knowledge, the white collar class, right, as they say. Um, but where we are seeing the best uses of AI, especially generative AI, are in workflows that are data centric, that are highly repetitive, where you're applying the same judgments or decisions about. Turns out that describes a lawyer pretty good. So there's a bunch of studies out there, right, including one that we did, that says that about 80% of what a lawyer does is better done by AI. First of all, that is personally deeply insulting, but it's also absolutely true, right? Like we are just like teachers, just like some content creators, we are dealers in information. We take in information, we analyze it, we add our legal acumen to it, and then we deliver an information-based product, whether it's an argument in court, a tech license, an employment agreement, whatever it is. Every company does stuff, and they do stuff in a series of steps, and that's called a workflow, right? Some of those steps are better done by AI, and some of them are better done by humans. And so, what the trick is to understand, it's how do I bring AI into my company in workflows that will greatly optimize that step, building capacity, building margins, building consistency, and which ones are quintessentially human. This is one of my favorite quotes. This is no longer a tool. AI, we are getting to the point where we can do stuff that we have never been able to do before as humans. And the thing that we find that limits companies are two things. It's not the technology, it's the vision of the company's leaders, um, understanding just what this can do. Two is that there's fear of it, right? Companies spend in the midst of a great technological advancement, and this is throughout history, there are some companies that defend the way that they have historically been successful. Sometimes they'll try to add in the technology to do what they're doing today. Those companies don't make it. That's a Kodak, that's a Xerox, right? And if you look at Xerox, they literally had to completely reinvent themselves back to being a top technology company, but went through so much pain and suffering to do so, right? We are trying to encourage companies to have both a vision and the courage to safely and effectively transform their business and supersuit, as we call it, their business. Some recent advancement in tech, cool stuff going on, right? So OpenAI is O1 and O3, XAI is Grok 3, DeepSeek. Please be careful. We can talk about that. Call me if you have questions. Amazon's Nova supposedly is one of these. This is an evolutional step. This is going from Neanderthal AI into Homo sapien AI. These advanced or deep reasoning engines are crazy powerful. We work in some of the most cutting edge applications of AI, and what these higher reasoning models can do will blow your mind. And the way that they can transform your company, reach out to us. It's very interesting. We'll leave you with these points. One, like we said, AI and humans both have unique strengths. And think Iron Man, not the Terminator, right? So, what we tell clients all the time is you're not going to, for most jobs, 99.9% of jobs, you're not going to unplug a person and plug in an AI like a robot, the Terminator, to do it. You're going to replace tasks within a job with AI. And so think, well, with Iron Man, we have Pepper Potts or we have Tony Stark, who are brilliant human beings whose abilities are extended and augmented by surrounding them with enabling technology, like the Iron Man suit, like Jarvis. So this is what we try to get into the minds of our clients, is to think, how can you, what are your biggest pain points? Like, what are the stuff you do over and over again, and it's such a pain? Or what are your wildest hopes and dreams? Like, man, if I could do this tomorrow, I would do this. That's the way to think. Those are the ways that you can build little AI agents to take over specific steps, or giant AI systems that can take over much more responsibilities or more functions than particular steps. So we are very optimistic about AI. Um, it's not going to take over the world, at least in the next 6 months. So we're pretty good there. There is a lot of great thinking going on in how to um, effectively build, monitor, design, test AI systems. And this is where we're working so closely with the Chamber, with the Office of AI Policy and the legislature and executive to try to get really smart policy. And you're starting to see that come out in some of these bills that are coming, that are on the Hill today. So with that, let me throw it open to if you have any questions. And while you're thinking about that, we do want to tell you about the Chamber is sponsoring a masterclass an in-person masterclass on AI that we will be presenting. This will be in one sessions, 1 week apart. So there are morning sessions from 8:30 to 12 on March 27th, and then a week later on April 3rd. This will deep dive into what is AI, what are the different kinds of AI, and how are they being used effectively. We'll go through the steps of evaluating AI use cases. The next two modules the following week are how do you set up an AI governance program, going deeply into that AI strategy, And then how do you effectively deploy it and go through some really cool kind of workshop and hands-on things about that. So with that, thank you very much for attending. Please reach out to us. We are very happy to help organizations of all sizes, especially through the Academy. We do a great deal of work with small businesses, nonprofits, access to justice, human and civil rights. So if you've got any questions at all, please reach out to us. And thank you to the Chamber for having us host this event.